Carnage always smells like rusted copper, yet treason carries sweet notes of crushed lavender and winter mint. As sterling wolves raised glasses toasting Alpha King Olivia, one invisible maid watched a silent coup unfold. Cora faced two impossible choices: stay hidden, or step from shadows and risk everything. The Sterling estate, a sprawling brutalist mansion carved into the side of an aspen mountain, hummed with the dangerous electric energy of 300 apex predators in evening wear. This was the winter solstice feast, the one night a year where the North American werewolf syndicates dropped their corporate masks and paid primal homage to the Alpha King, Olivia Sterling. To the outside world, Olivia was a reclusive tech billionaire, the majority shareholder of Sterling Global. But inside the soundproofed, reinforced glass walls of the estate, he was the absolute law. Cora Hastings knew better than to look the Alpha King in the eye. She was an Omega, and worse, a packless one taken in out of pity. In the rigid hierarchy of the wolves, she was the lowest rung on the ladder, a glorified servant whose only value lay in her ability to keep the silver polished, the venison roasted, and her mouth shut. Cora hadn't spoken a word in 6 years, not since the night a rival faction decimated her original family in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The trauma had locked her vocal cords, turning her into a ghost. And in a house full of volatile, dominant wolves, being a ghost was the ultimate survival strategy. Tonight, Cora was dressed in the stark black uniform of the catering staff, her pale blonde hair pulled back into a severe knot. She moved through the cavernous ballroom with practiced invisibility, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. The room was a sensory overload. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, expensive Tom Ford cologne, Chanel perfumes, and underneath it all, the heavy, musky pheromones of dominance, anxiety, and lust. Through the throng of bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns, Cora's eyes naturally drifted to the high table. Olivia Sterling sat at the center, radiating a quiet, suffocating power. He was a massive man, broad-shouldered and sharp-jawed, his dark hair neatly swept back, though a few unruly strands defied the styling gel. His eyes, a piercing, icy gray, tracked the room with a predator's lazy calculation. Beside him sat the visiting dignitaries: Arthur Pendleton, the ruthless alpha of the Chicago logistics empire, and Claire Montgomery, the notoriously violent matriarch of the Eastern Seaboard. But it wasn't the alphas who held Cora's attention. Her gaze slipped to the man standing just behind Olivia's right shoulder, Gideon Blackwood. Gideon was Olivia's beta, his right hand, and the chief operating officer of Sterling Global. To everyone else, Gideon smelled of loyalty, a crisp, cedarwood scent that blended seamlessly with Olivia's heavy, thunderstorm aura. But Cora, unburdened by the ego and aggressive posturing of the higher ranks, had always possessed a hypersensitive nose. She didn't just smell the surface. She smelled the emotional undercurrents. For the past 3 weeks, Gideon's scent had been souring at the edges. A faint, acrid tang of anxiety, the smell of a man hiding a massive, crushing secret. Cora wiped down a marble cocktail table near the grand staircase, her head bowed. She watched as a woman approached Gideon. It was Lady Arabella Sinclair, a high-ranking socialite from a wealthy Californian pack. Arabella was stunning, wrapped in crimson silk, but as she brushed past Gideon, Cora caught the briefest exchange. It wasn't a word. It was a microscopic sleight of hand. Arabella's manicured fingers grazed Gideon's cuff, and a tiny, slender glass vial disappeared into the beta's sleeve. Cora's heart gave a sudden, painful thud against her ribs. She kept wiping the table, her movements mechanical, but her mind was racing. What was that? She subtly shifted her position, moving closer to the service doors that led to the kitchens, giving her a better angle on the high table. Gideon leaned down to whisper something into Olivia's ear. Olivia nodded, his expression unreadable, and gestured for his empty wine glass to be refilled. The sommelier, a beta from the French packs named Laurent, stepped forward with a bottle of an incredibly rare spiced Bordeaux. But before Laurent could pour, Gideon held up a hand. "Allow me, Laurent," Gideon said, his voice smooth, amplified perfectly over the low din of the room. "A special toast for the king requires a personal touch." Laurent smiled and handed over the bottle, stepping back. Cora watched, her breath shallow. From a distance of 50 feet, through a crowd of shifting bodies, she saw Gideon turn his back slightly to the room. It was a masterclass in misdirection. He used his broad shoulders to block the view of the alphas at the table. But from Cora's angled vantage point near the service doors, She saw the flick of his wrist. She saw the vial empty into the king's crystal goblet before the dark red wine chased it down, hiding whatever had been inside. A sudden, jarring scent hit the air. It was microscopic, buried under the heavy spices of the Bordeaux, the roasted garlic from the kitchens, and the overwhelming musk of 300 wolves. But Cora smelled it. Crushed lavender and winter mint. It was the unmistakable, synthetic masking scent of refined wolfsbane, mixed with liquid silver, a neurotoxin developed on the black market, specifically designed to bypass an alpha's healing factor. It wouldn't just kill Olivia. It would paralyze his nervous system, leaving him suffocating while fully conscious, ensuring he couldn't even issue a dying command through the pack mind link. Gideon turned back around, a warm, perfectly manufactured smile on his face. He placed the heavy crystal goblet directly in front of Olivia Sterling. The room began to quiet as Gideon tapped a silver spoon against his own glass. The sound rang out like a death knell. "Ladies, gentlemen, alphas, and honored guests," Gideon projected, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "If I could have your attention." Cora stood frozen by the service doors. The tray in her hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She looked at the private security guards lining the wall's Aegis operatives, heavily armed, but they answered to Gideon as much as they answered to Olivia. If Olivia died right now, Gideon would instantly claim the Alpha Spark. The pack would fall under his control before Olivia's body even hit the floor, and anyone who opposed him, including any witnesses who saw too much, would be slaughtered. "Stay invisible," her survival instincts screamed at her. "Look away. It's not your business. You are an Omega. You are nothing. Survive." Olivia picked up the glass. He swirled the dark liquid, his icy gray eyes fixed on Gideon with a look of mild amusement, completely unaware that he was holding his own execution in his massive hand. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the longest night of the year," Gideon continued, raising his own glass, "but the long, prosperous reign of our Alpha King. Under Olivia Sterling, our territories have expanded, our businesses have thrived, and our families have grown wealthy and secure." A low murmur of agreement rumbled through the crowd. Around the room, wolves raised their glasses. Cora's eyes were locked on Olivia's hand. The glass was inches from his mouth. The scent of the poison was stronger now, curling through the air like invisible, toxic smoke. How could the other alphas not smell it? But she knew why. The spiced Bordeaux was specifically chosen for its aggressive aromatic profile, and the arrogance of the dominant wolves blinded them to the subtleties of the room. Only a prey animal, hyper-vigilant and terrified, could sense the trap. "To the king," Gideon declared. "To the king!" the room roared back in unison. Olivia parted his lips, bringing the rim of the crystal goblet to his mouth. Cora didn't make a conscious decision. The memory of her original pack, the blood, the screams, the bodies of her family torn apart by a usurper's greed flashed violently behind her eyes. She couldn't watch it happen again. She couldn't let the rot spread to this pack, even if she was just a ghost within it. She dropped her serving tray. Clang. The sound of the heavy silver tray and shattering champagne flutes hitting the marble floor was like a gunshot in the silent, reverent room. 300 heads snapped toward the source of the noise. Olivia paused, the glass hovering a fraction of an inch from his lips. His heavy brow furrowed, his icy eyes zeroing in on the small, trembling kitchen maid standing by the service doors. Gideon's jaw clenched, a flash of pure, murderous rage crossing his features before he masked it. "Guards," Gideon snapped. "Remove the clumsy girl. Apologies, Olivia, please, drink." 2 massive Aegis security guards immediately stepped away from the wall, marching toward Cora. Cora didn't run away. She ran forward. She darted between the tables, slipping past the grasping hands of a senator's wife and dodging an angry grunt from Arthur Pendleton's bodyguard. She was small, fast, and fueled by pure adrenaline. The guards were heavy and slow in their suits, unaccustomed to someone rushing toward the most dangerous man in the room. "Hey," one of the guards shouted, lunging for her collar. Cora ducked under his massive arm, scrambling up the carpeted steps of the high dais. She was breaking every sacred law of the pack. An Omega approaching an Alpha uninvited was punishable by a brutal beating. Interrupting a high ceremony toast was practically a death sentence. Olivia watched her approach, his body going completely still. He didn't look angry, just intensely curious. His wolf was right at the surface, his eyes flashing a brilliant, luminescent gold for a split second. Gideon stepped into her path, his hand reaching inside his tuxedo jacket, undoubtedly going for a concealed weapon. "Get back, you filthy little—" Cora didn't stop. She threw her body weight forward, sliding on her knees across the polished wood of the dais. She slipped right past Gideon's grabbing hands and crashed directly into Olivia Sterling's heavy oak chair. With a desperate, frantic swipe of her hand, she batted the crystal goblet out of Olivia's grip. The heavy glass shattered spectacularly against the stone floor. The dark red wine splashed across Olivia's polished dress shoes and pooled on the rug. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. Then, dead, horrifying silence. No one moved. The guards froze. The visiting alphas stared in shock. Gideon drew a silver-plated sidearm, aiming it directly at the back of Cora's head. "You suicidal bitch," he hissed. "I'll kill you where you kneel." Cora was on her hands and knees in the puddle of spilled wine. The scent of the lavender and mint neurotoxin was overpowering now, burning her nasal passages. Her chest heaved, her heart hammering violently against her sternum. She slowly lifted her head to look at Olivia. The Alpha King was staring down at her. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying calm. He looked from her terrified eyes to the spilled wine, and then to Gideon's drawn gun. "Gideon," Olivia's voice was barely a rumble, but it carried the weight of a physical blow. "Put the gun down. Olivia, she just attacked you. She's a rabid Omega." "Let me handle this," Gideon urged, his finger hovering over the trigger. Cora knew Gideon would shoot. He had to. He had to silence her before Olivia smelled the poison evaporating from the floorboards. Cora reached out. Her small, trembling, wine-stained fingers gripped the fabric of Olivia's tuxedo trousers. It was an incredibly intimate, forbidden touch. Olivia flinched slightly, his golden eyes snapping back down to her. She opened her mouth. Her throat felt tight, filled with dust and rusted metal. She hadn't used her voice in 6 years. It fought her, tearing at her vocal cords as she forced air through them. Olivia leaned down slightly, his sharp senses catching the scent of her absolute, unadulterated terror and something else. He smelled the floor. His nostrils flared. Cora stared directly into the Alpha King's eyes, her grip tightening on his leg. She parted her lips, and in a broken, raspy whisper that sounded like dry leaves scraping across stone, she spoke her first words in 6 years. "Stay silent," she breathed, her voice cracking. She slowly shifted her eyes toward Gideon, then back to Olivia. "Breathe the wine, my king. Breathe." Olivia didn't react immediately. He kept his eyes locked on Cora's face, but he inhaled deeply through his nose. In that microsecond, Cora watched the realization hit him. The king was ancient, wise, and highly educated in the dark arts of pack warfare. He instantly identified the synthetic sting of the wolfsbane neurotoxin masking beneath the spices. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Olivia Sterling didn't shout. He didn't roar. He slowly reached down, his massive hand gently enveloping Cora's small, shaking shoulder. He pulled her slightly behind his legs, shielding her body with his own. Then, he stood up. "Gideon," Olivia said, his voice terrifyingly gentle. "Why does my wine smell like a funeral?" The silence that followed Olivia's question was heavy enough to crack the marble foundation of the Sterling estate. Gideon's perfectly manufactured smile evaporated, replaced by the pale, rigid mask of a cornered animal. For a microsecond, the beta's eyes flicked to the scattered shards of crystal, and the dark wine seeping into the carpet the irrefutable evidence of his treason. He didn't try to lie. In the brutal, unforgiving world of the syndicates, hesitation was death. "Kill the king!" Gideon roared, his voice cracking with panicked ferocity. The ballroom erupted into absolute deafening chaos. The elegant facade of the winter solstice feast disintegrated in a heartbeat. 5 of the Aegis security guards, Gideon's planted loyalists, raised their submachine guns, the suppressed muzzles flashing as they unloaded specialized silver hollow points toward the high table. Olivia moved with the precise, lethal economy of a Tier 1 operator, his instincts honed from years spent in classified naval special warfare units long before he claimed the Alpha Spark. He didn't shift into his wolf form. It was too slow for the immediate threat of ballistic fire. Instead, he lunged forward, his massive hand locking around Cora's waist, sweeping her off her knees. He practically threw them both behind the heavy, reinforced oak of the high table, just as the wall behind them disintegrated into a cloud of plaster and pulverized stone. "Alistair!" Olivia bellowed over the deafening roar of gunfire, his voice echoing with the primal, undeniable resonance of an alpha command. Across the room, Alistair Reed, Olivia's fiercely loyal head of security, snapped into action. "Protect the king! Put the traitors down!" he barked, drawing his own weapon. The 300 guests scattered, a terrifying stampede of dominant predators slipping on shattered glass and spilled food. Some shifted instantly, massive wolves of timber and gray tearing through bespoke suits and silk gowns, their snarls shaking the crystal chandeliers. Arthur Pendleton, the Chicago Alpha, overturned a caviar station to use as barricade, while Claire Montgomery simply drove a stiletto heel into the eye of a rogue guard who got too close. Behind the oak table, Cora pressed her hands over her ears, her entire body vibrating with terror. The metallic tang of blood instantly flooded the air, mixing violently with the lingering scent of the lavender and mint neurotoxin. "Are you hit?" Olivia demanded. His icy gray eyes swept over her rapidly, checking for wounds. He was dangerously close, his chest heaving, his scent a rolling thunderstorm of ozone and protective fury. Cora shook her head frantically, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looked up at him, her vocal cords still burning from her earlier. Desperate warning. "No," she managed to raspy out. "We can't stay here," Olivia said, pulling a compact, silver-plated sidearm from an ankle holster beneath his trousers. "Gideon's men have the exits bottlenecked. He coordinated this with the Moretti Syndicate. Only the Sicilian families have access to that specific synthetic wolfsbane. They'll have a heavily armed perimeter outside." Cora's survivalist instincts, buried deep under years of conditioned subservience, suddenly flared to life. She knew this estate better than anyone. While the Alphas stalked the grand halls and the Betas managed the grounds, the Omegas mapped the shadows. She knew the hidden veins of the house, the structural blind spots, the old servant passages, the maintenance shafts that bypassed the modern security cameras. She reached out, grabbing Olivia's wrist. The touch sent a strange electric jolt up her arm, but she ignored it, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "The kitchens," Cora rasped, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "Behind the cold storage. There's an old Prohibition-era bootlegger tunnel. It leads to the ravine." Olivia stared at her. The quiet, invisible maid who hadn't made a sound in 6 years was suddenly giving him tactical exfiltration routes. A fierce, predatory grin touched the corners of his mouth. "Lead the way, little ghost." Olivia provided covering fire, taking out 2 of Gideon's advancing loyalists with terrifying precision. He grabbed Cora's hand, his grip warm and impossibly strong, and they bolted. They sprinted through the swinging service doors, leaving the slaughterhouse of the ballroom behind. The industrial kitchen was a landscape of abandoned prep stations and boiling pots left unattended. Cora didn't hesitate. She moved with fluid, frantic agility, pulling the Alpha King past the massive stainless steel ovens and toward the walk-in freezers at the very back. "Hold," Olivia commanded softly, pulling her against his chest as they rounded a corner. He raised his gun, his acute hearing picking up the heavy, booted footsteps of a tactical team entering the kitchen from the loading dock. "Spread out," a voice ordered Harrison, one of Gideon's chief lieutenants. "The Beta wants the king's head, and the girl alive. He wants to peel her himself." Cora shuddered, a cold wave of nausea rolling over her. But Olivia's arm tightened around her waist, a solid, immovable anchor. "They're blocking the tunnel entrance," Olivia whispered, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "I have to clear them. When I move, you stay behind the steel prep tables. Do not move until I call for you. Understand?" Cora looked at the heavily armed men fanning out across the kitchen. If Olivia stepped out, he would be walking into a fatal crossfire. It wasn't a fight he could win with a handgun. He needed a distraction. She looked around the prep station. Directly above them sat the kitchen's main chemical fire suppression system, a labyrinth of pipes filled with dense, suffocating foam. She caught Olivia's eye, pointing to the red manual override lever situated on the wall behind Harrison. Then, she picked up a heavy cast-iron meat tenderizer. Olivia saw her plan and his eyes widened slightly in dark approval. Cora didn't wait for permission. She hurled the heavy iron mallet with all her strength across the room. It shattered a stack of porcelain plates on a distant counter. All 4 gunmen whipped around, aiming their weapons at the noise. In that split second of diverted attention, Olivia moved. He didn't just step out. He launched himself over the prep counter. He fired twice, dropping the 2 men closest to him before their boots could even pivot back. Harrison roared, swinging his submachine gun toward Olivia, but Cora was already moving. She slid across the grease-slicked floor, throwing her body weight into the wall and slamming her palm against the red override lever. Alarms shrieked. The ceiling violently hissed, and thick, blinding white chemical foam cascaded down in a heavy curtain, plunging the kitchen into a chaotic whiteout. Blind firing erupted. Olivia, relying entirely on his superior wolf senses, navigated the blinding foam with lethal accuracy. Within 10 seconds, the gunfire ceased. The only sounds were the blaring alarms and the hiss of the suppression system. "Cora," Olivia's voice cut through the noise, low and commanding. She crawled out from under a counter, covered in white chemical residue. Olivia stood amidst the unconscious and bleeding bodies of Gideon's team. He reached down, pulling her to her feet, his eyes burning with a brilliant, luminescent gold. "You're a damn menace," Olivia murmured, his chest rumbling with a sound that was half chuckle, half growl. "Let's find this tunnel." They navigated the dark, damp bootlegger tunnel beneath the estate, the air growing colder and smelling of wet earth and pine needles. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind a sharp ache in Cora's chest. Olivia walked ahead, using the flashlight on his encrypted military-grade comms device. He had already sent a coded burst to Alistair. A counterstrike was mobilizing. "Why didn't you speak?" Olivia asked suddenly, his voice echoing softly in the narrow stone corridor. 6 years in my house. Not a single word. Why tonight? Cora wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her thin catering uniform. "Because I know what it looks like when a pack is stolen from the inside," she rasped. "My original pack. The Blue Ridge Syndicate. My alpha was weak. His beta poisoned him. I hid in the floorboards and watched them slaughter my family. I survived in the mountains for 3 weeks before your border patrols found me." Olivia stepped closer, his imposing frame taking up the narrow width of the tunnel. "And you thought I was weak, Cora? You thought Gideon would slaughter us?" "No," she said, her chin lifting defiantly. "I knew Gideon was weak. He needed poison because he could never take you in a fair fight. I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't stay silent." Olivia stared down at her, the golden ring around his iris expanding. In the damp dirt tunnel, stripped of wealth and rigid society rules, Olivia didn't see a servant. He saw a survivor. He reached out, his large hand gently cupping her jaw. "You saved my life, Cora," Olivia murmured. "The law says an Omega cannot approach an Alpha. Tonight, I say the law is Ash. You are under my personal protection. Do you understand me?" Cora nodded, leaning infinitesimally into his touch. "Yes." His comms device vibrated violently. His expression hardened back into a ruthless tactician. "Gideon broke the perimeter. He's running for the private airstrip on the North Ridge." Olivia turned off the flashlight. "He doesn't get to leave this mountain." They emerged from the tunnel into the biting aspen wind. The snow was knee-deep, illuminated by the harsh silver light of the moon. Olivia didn't shift. He drew his weapon, a customized Salient Arms Glock 19, and began to track, his Navy SEAL-honed senses dialed to the absolute maximum. Cora followed closely behind, stepping precisely in his massive boot prints. They reached the tree line overlooking the private airstrip. A sleek, black Gulfstream G650ER jet sat on the tarmac, its twin Rolls-Royce engines whining with a high-pitched crescendo. Gideon was sprinting across the snow-dusted runway, flanked by 2 heavily armed guards. Olivia didn't bother shouting a warning. He dropped to one knee in the snow, bringing the handgun up in a smooth motion. He exhaled and pulled the trigger twice. The 2 guards dropped instantly, sliding across the icy tarmac. Gideon froze, whirling around. He saw Olivia stepping out from the tree line, a dark, avenging silhouette against the snow. Panic broke through Gideon's polished veneer. He dropped to his knees, throwing his hands in the air. "Olivia! Wait! The Morettis forced me. They threatened my family." Olivia walked slowly across the runway, the snow crunching heavily under his boots. Cora stepped out of the tree line, watching the karma she had prayed for finally balance the scales. "The Morettis don't dictate the laws of this pack, Gideon," Olivia said, stopping 10 feet from the kneeling beta. "You broke the oldest law. You brought poison to a peace feast." "Mercy, Olivia," Gideon begged, his eyes darting toward Cora. "It was just business. Tell him, girl. Tell him I didn't want this." Cora felt no pity. She felt only the icy clarity of justice. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Alpha King. "He smells of lies," Cora said clearly, her voice echoing over the jet engines. "He smells of ambition and cowardice. Olivia didn't look away from Gideon, but a grim smile touched his lips at Cora's words. He raised the salient arms Glock, aiming directly at Gideon's forehead. "The sentence for high treason is death," Olivia declared. A single shot rang out, shattering the quiet of the solstice night. Gideon crumpled into the snow. The threat to the Sterling Syndicate was permanently erased. Olivia slowly holstered his weapon. He walked over to Cora, wrapping his heavy, wool-lined overcoat around her freezing shoulders. He pulled her flush against his chest, inhaling the sweet scent of her skin. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm not scared," Cora whispered back, wrapping her arms securely around his waist. For the first time in her life, it was the absolute truth. The invisible kitchen maid died that night on the ballroom floor, replaced by a queen forged in survival and silver. Cora Hastings never shrank into the shadows again, standing fiercely beside Olivia as an equal. The Sterling Syndicate learned a brutal, indelible lesson about karma. The most dangerous threat never announces itself with a roar, but with the quiet, unwavering courage of someone who refuses to stay silent.